Just because you're a great player doesn't mean you're going to be a great head coach. Those are two vastly different skill sets. And just because you know how to play the game of football well does not mean you know how to coach it well and teach others how to play it. For every Mike Ditka, there are 100 Antonio Pierces. Jeff Saturday was one of the greatest centers of all time and was an instrumental part of the offensive line of the Indianapolis Colts during the 2000s. As a head coach, he was so bad that he will forever be known as the man who was on the losing end of the biggest comeback in NFL history. Jim Ringo was a 10-time Pro Bowler, a Hall of Fame offensive lineman, and one of the best centers to ever do it, playing a key part in the Green Bay Packer dynasty of the 1960s. As a head coach, he went 3-20, and was so bad that he even quit in the middle of a game, in an incident that you can learn more about by clicking the card in the upper right corner. Bart Starr is one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time. Bart Starr is also one of the worst head coaches of all time, and you can learn more about how bad he was by clicking the card in the upper right corner, because trust me, he was really bad. Bottom line, playing and coaching are two different things. They are two different career paths, and you have to know how to differentiate the player from the coach. But what happens when you can't? What happens when the incredible playing career intersects with the abysmal coaching career? Well, you get what happens to the man you've been watching this entire time. This is New Orleans Saints head coach Tom Fears, and we're going to talk about his playing days and just how good he was on the field in just a bit, because trust me, he was a heck of a player. However, in 1970, Fears got fired from the New Orleans Saints in just about the most awkward way possible. Because imagine honoring a guy for how good he was as a player and presenting him with the highest honor a player can receive, only to show him the door hours later. You can be talking with the couple in public, and the couple breaks up with each other because one of them found out the other one was cheating on them, and I promise you, it won't be as awkward and as horribly timed as this incident with Tom Fears was, because it deserves a deep dive more than half a century later for just how uncomfortable it was. Because this is the story behind Tom Fears, and what has to be, considering the circumstances, the most awkward firing in NFL history. Make sure you hit that like button down below, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss a single video that we post on the channel, because we post every single day on here about the weird and the wacky history of the NFL with stories like this one that you may not have heard of before. So if you like that sort of stuff and want to join this community, then this is the place for you. Thanks in advance for liking and subscribing, and with that in mind, let's talk about the fear of Tom Fears losing his job. Before I talk about Tom Fears the player and just what exactly went down, we need some context to understand just who Tom Fears the coach was. The year is 1970, and the New Orleans Saints, in their 4th year of existence, are really bad. Fears was hired by the team as the first coach in franchise history, but to say that things have been underwhelming so far would be putting it lightly. We were 48 games into his tenure as a head coach, and Fears had won just 13 times. When you're winning 27% of the time, so you're losing roughly 3 out of every 4 games, that is really bad. For some perspective on how bad that is, at that time in NFL history, of every coach to coach at least 48 games, only one had a worse winning percentage, and that was Burt Bell, who won just 17% of the 58 games that he coached. The caveat with Bell was that he owned the Philadelphia Eagles, so you can't really fire yourself. So in terms of pure head coaches, by winning percentage, Fears was the worst of the bunch at the time, considering his sample size. And as you can tell from these lowlights, the 1970 season was not going well for New Orleans. In fact, it was on pace to be the team's worst season yet. We were 6 weeks into the season, and the New Orleans Saints had managed to win just 1 game, being one of 2 teams in the NFC, alongside the Philadelphia Eagles, to not have multiple wins at this juncture. The Saints had an abysmal offense. At 6 games in, they had scored just 68 points, or slightly over 11 points per game. This was not just the worst offense in the NFC, but was only 1 point better than the Boston Patriots for the worst offense in the NFL. Their point differential of -58 was only better than the Philadelphia Eagles for the worst in the NFC. And they were coming off of a blowout 32-14 loss to the Atlanta Falcons, which not only gave their arch rivals the series sweep, but was so bad that they committed 11 penalties and never led at any point in the contest. With their season dead in the water at the halfway point, Tom Fears, in his fourth season as head coach, and with things getting worse by the second, was on super thin ice. We didn't know whether owner John Mecum was going to make a change in the middle of the season or not, but we did know this. Fears, for a variety of reasons, was on the hottest of hot seats. As one source said, after the Saints lost that game by 18 points to the Falcons, if things don't take a change for the better, I can't see Fears staying on as coach after this season. It is an extremely critical year for him. Safe to say, life in the NFL had not gone according to plan for Tom Fears as a coach. However, life in the NFL as a player? That was an entirely different story. Because prior to becoming the head coach of the New Orleans Saints, in the 1940s and the 1950s, Tom Fears was one of the best receivers that the NFL had ever seen. For 3 straight seasons, from 1948 to 50, Tom Fears led the NFL in receptions, being just the second player in NFL history, alongside Don Hudson, to lead the NFL in this category 3 times. He actually became the first player alongside Hudson to lead it twice, let alone 3 times. And his 84 receptions during the 1950 season set an NFL record that would last until 1964, when Johnny Morris of the Chicago Bears broke it. In other words, what Fears was doing as a wideout was unprecedented. He led the NFL in receiving touchdowns in 1949, led the NFL in receiving yards in 1950, and famously caught the game-winning touchdown from 73 yards out in the fourth quarter of the 1951 NFL Championship to give the Los Angeles Rams their first title since moving to LA, defeating the Cleveland Browns. By the time Fears was done playing, he truly was one of the best receivers of all time, and was an instrumental part of those early 1950s Rams teams that were constantly good and had some of the greatest offenses ever assembled. He ended his career with 400 receptions for 5,397 yards and 38 touchdowns. Now, by today's standards, you might not think that's a lot to write home about. Heck, Eric Decker had better numbers in all 3 of those categories, and no one's talking about him as one of the all-time greats. But you have to understand the context of playing in the 1940s and the 1950s. It was a completely different era, and considering how the game was, Fears was one of the best receivers to ever do it. His 400 receptions ranked second in NFL history, only behind Don Hudson, as not only was he one of just 7 players to have at least 300 career receptions, but along with Hudson, he was the only one to have at least 400. His 5,397 receiving yards ranked 6th all-time in NFL history. He was one of just 8 players to cross that 5,000-yard mark, and one of just 10 players to cross that 4,000-yard mark. And his 38 touchdowns ranked 9th in NFL history by the time he called it quits after the 1956 season. With this not even counting his game-winning touchdown in the championship that might have been, at the time, the most iconic touchdown in NFL history. You name it, Fears was near the top of the NFL in a category. There's a reason that Fears made it onto the All-1950s team, and that's because, quite simply, he was amazing. Fears had etched his name into NFL history for his contributions as a player, and would be remembered as one of the all-time greats. And to solidify the fact that Tom Fears was one of the greatest receivers of all time, and one of the greatest players to ever play this sport, he received the highest honor that any player could ever get, an induction into the Hall of Fame. Because as part of the 1970 Hall of Fame class, Fears was one of 4 guys to get enshrined as a canon and live on in football immortality. He got his honor, he got his gold jacket, and he was about to get his ring. Now, when it comes to the Hall of Fame, you don't get your ring right then and there. You get your ring later on in the year, usually in a ceremony on the field. Which raises the question, when should Fears, as the head coach of the New Orleans Saints, get his ring? Well, it made the most sense to do it during the 7th week of the season, when the New Orleans Saints were at home and playing the Los Angeles Rams. You want this ceremony to be at home. It wouldn't make a lot of sense to do the ring ceremony on the road. Can you imagine Eric Allen this year getting his Hall of Fame ring during a game against the Dallas Cowboys at AT&T Stadium? Yeah, it doesn't work like that. You get it at home. And doing it against the Rams makes the most sense, seeing as he played his entire career with the Los Angeles Rams. Saints fans get to honor their coach. Rams fans get to honor their legend. Anyone who was on the staff for the Rams at the time Fears was playing can stay on the field and watch him get his ring, and everyone's happy. This date, November 1st, 1970, always made the most sense to honor this man, seeing as he had deep connections with the two teams playing. And sure enough, Fears got his Hall of Fame ring at halftime of the game. The Saints fans in attendance cheered him on. The Rams fans in attendance, with this meaning more to them than the Saints fans, cheered him on. The players cheered him on. Just an all-around happy moment for a player who deserved it. And all 77,000 fans were on their feet and celebrating the final part of Fears solidifying himself into the Hall of Fame. That was the good news. Now we get to the bad news. Fears was booed loudly before this game right here. Saints fans were calling for his head as the game went on. The Saints lost the game 30-17 after blowing an early 14-0 lead in the first quarter, and Fears was fired after the game. Yep. Talk about awkward timing. After the Rams absolutely dominated the contest, practically doubling the Saints in total yardage 408-212, and in first downs 21-11, and after scoring 30 of the final 33 points of the contest, Fears was relieved of his duties, as the Saints decided to go in a different direction by firing the only coach they ever had in franchise history, with J.D. Roberts taking over in the interim role for the remainder of the season. Oh, and to make matters worse, this came right after owner John Mecum flat out said that he wasn't going to fire Fears in the middle of the season, saying, "I don't think a change right now would be in the best interest of the team." So just to recap, the entire day is centered around you and your accomplishments. The halftime show is in your honor. You get your Hall of Fame ring, and then you're immediately fired right after. And I'm not saying that Fears didn't deserve to be fired. Believe me, I'm not saying that at all. This is a cold business. I'm not going to say that the Saints were wrong for firing a guy who was 1-5-1 to start the season off, who won 13 out of a possible 49 games in his 4 seasons, who was getting worse, and who seemed to be getting everything wrong and pushing all the wrong buttons. Fears never got another head coaching job again after this, so it's not like the Saints let a good one get away. Heck, why he was even hired in the first place, seeing as he was the offensive coordinator of the Atlanta Falcons in 1966, and they literally had the worst offense in football that year, was a head-scratching decision that clearly didn't work out. But it's more about the timing of it all. It would be like if your office throws you a party for your birthday, gets you a cake, gives you presents, and then, at the end of the day, decides to fire you. Like, that's some birthday party. And like I said before, when it comes to great players, you have to separate their playing career from their coaching career. But when they intersect like this, it leads to one of the most awkward firings of all time. Side note, I love how the fans were booing during the game, but cheering during the ceremony, as if they knew how to separate the player and the coach. It's almost like when you see umpires arguing with managers, and they'll stop their argument in the middle of God Bless America. Like, yeah, we're not going to take this moment away from you because you were a heck of a player, but we're going to boo the crap out of you during the game for destroying our beloved Saints. There have been a lot of firings in NFL history with head coaches. The one involving this man right here in Tom Fears, well, that might have to be, considering the circumstances, the most awkward one of all time, seeing as it came right after they honored him for how good he was as a player. You get into the Hall of Fame and get your ring that they can never take away from you, and then they take your job away from you. Just a bizarre situation all the way around. Because in 1970, For as much as Tom Fears put fear into opposing defenses, the Saints ownership had no fear when it came to letting him go. Be sure to like and subscribe if you have not done so already, as it helps the channel out a lot, and check out my other channels, JG8 for the history of college football, JG7 for the history of baseball, and JG9 News, where we talk about all things happening in the NFL. Join me every Wednesday night at 8 p.m. Eastern, where we'll play live NFL trivia for cash prizes. And make sure to join me live, as we're on stream just about every single day. And thanks to all our Patreon members and our YouTube members for helping out the channel. See how you become a member and show your support financially in the description down below.